Sarah, are we good to go on your side? I realized that 6 o'clock snuck off on us real quick there. All right, well, welcome everybody. It is 6 o'clock, so I will call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional First People of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis.
Present.
Mr. Mosier. Oh, he is not here. Mr. Pike.
Here.
Mr. Yestad.
Here.
Ms. Carlson.
Here.
And Mr. Celine is.
I believe Mr. Celine will be joining us
Yes.
here in a second. Thank you.
And Mr. Christensen is absent.
Thank you. Any correspondence or agenda changes this evening? There are no ceremonial matters, so that would bring us to special reports. Tonight, we do have a scheduled special report on the Sitka Housing Summit. I understand Amy Ainsley and Robin Sherman are here to talk about the proceedings. Looks like Amy might be online. Oh, no, she's right there. Well, hello. You're controlling it remotely. Wow, technology. When it works well. Welcome to you both, and thank you for giving us an update on the Sitka Housing Summit.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. As you introduced us, Amy Ainsley, Planning and Community Development Director for the City and Borough of Sitka. And I'm joined by Robin Sherman, who is the Communications Director for the Sitka Tribe of Alaska. And so the presentation that we have prepared for you tonight is a product of the both the Sitka Housing Summit that we held here in Sitka in late March, which we had Assemblymember Carlson was present, and we had about 70 participants representing federal, state, and local funding agencies, as well as nonprofit entities, developers, and other builders to kind of come together and talk about Sitka's housing problem, as well as a community housing meeting in the early April, I want to say April 10th, to kind of hear a little bit more from the community about what their ideas and priorities are around housing and some of the outcomes of the housing summit. And so this is a presentation that we developed as a part of those two, and I'm going to go ahead and let Robin kind of take it away from here.
Great. Well, thanks for having us here to talk about housing affordability in Sitka. Our goal tonight is to provide a definition of affordable housing, explain why we don't have more of it, and talk briefly about what city government and the community as a whole can do to change that. So what do we mean by affordable housing? Policymakers define it as housing that doesn't cost more than 30% of your household income. And in Sitka, more than half of renters have housing that's not affordable by that definition, and that's pretty much the highest rate in the state. More than 58% of Native households in Sitka are paying more than they can afford for rent, and about 1 in 5 homeowners in Sitka are paying more than they can afford for housing. So the situation is a little bit worse for renters. Sitka's median household income is $95,261 a year. That means that half of Sitka households earn more and half earn less. This chart shows affordable monthly housing costs for households at different percentages of Sitka's median income. And these particular income levels represent households that may be eligible for some form of housing subsidy. So you can see at that median income level, affordable monthly housing cost is about $2,400 a month. And at the bottom, you can see the percentage of Sitka households. So you can see that there are a lot of households in Sitka that are really going to struggle to afford housing here. There are different ways that housing can be affordable. If you've lived in Sitka for a long time, you remember that home prices and rent used to be much more affordable. When demand for housing is high, competition drives up the price of homes for sale and rent. making it harder for households, especially those with lower incomes, to compete. The housing that's still available at lower prices may be in poor condition or expensive to heat, or both. Our best example of unsubsidized housing in Sitka that's affordable is probably our mobile homes. 9% of our housing stock here in Sitka is mobile homes. That is pretty high relative to the US and Alaska. Housing can also be affordable because it's subsidized, usually by a government agency, but sometimes with funds from a foundation or a private nonprofit. And I'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of subsidies before I get back to unsubsidized housing. Subsidies can make building new housing less expensive for who's ever developing it, so they can sell or rent it at lower prices. And I'm calling that housing supply subsidies. The homes that Sitka Community Land Trust is building on the Old City Shops property are a good example of housing supply subsidies. And subsidies can also make housing less expensive for the home buyer or renter. And some housing projects subsidized housing projects have both types of subsidies. Eligibility for subsidized housing depends on household income. Most, but not all, rent subsidy programs are limited to households that earn less than 80% of area median income, adjusted for family size. The subsidy programs that are available for homeowners often target homeowners at slightly higher income levels, in a few cases up to 150% of area and median income. Some subsidized housing programs are targeted to specific demographic groups, including veterans, Native people, senior citizens, first-time homebuyers, and people with disabilities. Subsidies can also be available for different periods of time. Usually subsidies for public housing, like most of the rental housing that BHA owns and operates, usually require that that housing be affordable forever. Other subsidies, especially those for homeowners, might be a one-time thing, making that home affordable for a single household. Here's some examples of subsidized housing in Sitka. Homeownership is the preferred option for many households, but it's very challenging for households at lower incomes because the price of building new homes is so high that huge subsidies are required to make them affordable. And the older homes that you can buy at lower prices usually needs hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of improvements. The Sitka Community Land Trust is trying to make homeownership more affordable. Its homes on HPR are being built on land, of course, that was donated to the city. The Land Trust also receives subsidies to help pay for labor and materials so they can afford to sell the homes at affordable prices. It's a new model for Sitka. The homeowners are going to own the homes, but they'll lease the land from the Land Trust, and the resale price of the homes will be limited to keep them affordable for generations of homeowners. But even with the subsidies, households that earn less than 80% of area median income are still going to struggle to buy those homes. So if you can't buy one of those homes, what else is out there for homeowners? The average price of a home in Sitka is now over $500,000, and this slide is my attempt to come up with a monthly cost to own a home at the average price. So it assumes that the assessed value has not quite caught up with the recent increase in prices. It assumes that homeowners can qualify for a state homeownership program that reduces the required down payment and lowers the interest rate. I made a few guesses about insurance and utilities, and as you can see, the monthly cost to own this house would be about $3,500 a month, and that doesn't include the cost of any repairs that the home might need. So who can afford to buy this? A Sitka household earning that median income of about $95,000 is going to struggle with the monthly cost to own this house, especially if it needed repairs. Without paying more than 30% of your income toward housing costs, you'd need a household of income of about $140,000 a year to afford that average price home in Sitka. And that's assuming you're eligible for the state home ownership subsidy program, which starts to phase out around that level of household income depending on household size. The average affordable monthly housing cost for a median income household earning about $95,000 a year is a little less than $2,400 a month. With a 5% down payment, that household could afford to buy a home priced at about $342,000 without paying more than 30% of their income. And again, that doesn't figure in the cost of repairs. And anybody who's looked at home prices in Sitka recently knows that that is a very difficult animal to find here. Amy is going to explain why it's so difficult to build a house in Sitka that can be sold for $342,000. But first, I want to spend a minute talking about rentals. So the only market data we have on average rent in Sitka is from a statewide survey that happens in March. And it says that the average rent for all units is $1,364 a month. The average rent for a 3-bedroom apartment is a little over $1,600. You'd need an income of at least $65,560 a year to make that affordable. But we all know it's really hard to find a year-round rental at that price, especially if you have a dog. So why is that? There are really 3 distinct markets for unsubsidized rental units in Sitka. People who live here year-round, people who work here seasonally or for short periods of time, and seasonal visitors. 36% of year-round Sitka residents are renters, and the median income for those households is just under $56,000. Native households are much more likely to be renters than non-native households. 47% of native households rent compared to 36% of households overall in Sitka. Many of those native households have roots in Sitka that go back thousands of years. And some of our renters moved back to town after going away for college. Others moved here for a year-round job or for a seasonal job and decided to stay. What all of those people have in common is they can't afford to buy a home in Sitka. We don't have a lot of data on our seasonal and short-term workers, but we do know that some of them are well paid, such as traveling medical providers, and others are willing to live in overcrowded conditions for the experience of spending the summer in Alaska. Short-term workers may be willing and able to pay more for housing than Sitkans who live here year-round and work in lower-paying jobs. We do have data on short-term rentals that are primarily rented by seasonal visitors. In 2023, there were about 150 short-term rentals advertised on online platforms like Airbnb, and their average rental price per night was over $300. For the units, the short-term rental units that require permits from the city, the average rental revenue for the 2022 season was over $22,000. So if you can have rental property in Sitka and you can rent it for $300 a night, that's a good deal, especially if then you can also rent it out to a year-round Sitkan from October through April. It is tempting, and I've heard people blame owners of short-term rentals for the shortage of affordable rentals year-round, but it's important to remember that that's one of the ways that year-round residents are paying the mortgage on a house that they could barely afford to begin with, so it's complicated. Increasing our housing supply could help, but that's complicated too. As you can see, we built a lot more housing in the 1970s and 80s than we have more recently. These houses are now 40 and 50 years old, and they need a lot of expensive repairs. So why did we fall behind, and why aren't we building more housing now? And Amy's going to talk about that.
So I like to think about Sitka's housing challenges in these sort of 3 distinct buckets, but they all have interaction together and sort of interlacing relationships. But it's helpful to first peel them apart and then see how they interact. So first, just on land, I think this is the one that everyone talks about the most, is that Sitka's out of available land to build on. And we know that that's certainly a problem. A lot of the low-hanging fruit, the land that was going to be easier and less expensive to develop, has already been developed. And we know that what's left tends to be really marginal. We have very challenging terrain in terms of a lot of the muskeg and soil types, the wetness of our climate. And then we also have challenging topography as well. We have, steep hillsides that are extremely expensive to develop on and can also be hazardous as well. And so the land that we have left to develop on is a really significant housing challenge. And then we factor in, even if you can find land to develop on, the development in and of itself is very expensive. We live in a very high cost environment. As we know, everything, we're an island community. Everything that comes in has to be flown in or barged in. Costs of living is high, which also means that cost of labor is high. And so that high cost environment sort of begets itself and creates more and more of that high cost environment for itself. We also have a significant lack in what I kind of call backbone infrastructure. And so this is where we have areas that were developed with, private roads, private utilities that we can't branch off of. And so that means that when we want to do infill development or the next large subdivision, it's difficult to kind of leapfrog or spur that next development onwards because there isn't significant infrastructure in that area to build off of. And then that also, because of that lack of backbone infrastructure, it also means that some of the long-term costs of home ownership tend to be higher. So when private citizens are having to pay for utility access, private utility lines, so their service lines, instead of being 20 or 50 feet to a main, are now hundreds of feet to a main, or they're paying annually to maintain a private access easement or a driveway instead of being on a city street. Those are increased costs for homeowners that can create affordability problems for potential homeowners. And then we also just have market forces as well. So the financing in Sitka is really challenging, particularly for new construction. We don't really have a lot of homes that are built on spec for speculation. Here in Sitka, everything that is new construction, for the most part, are custom builds. And those homeowners are seeking financing for that build themselves, or they're paying cash for it. Either of those scenarios is extremely cash intensive. It requires the property owner or the homeowner to have a lot of cash on hand at the start, which means that the types of homes that are being constructed tend to be your higher end, larger custom homes. That has also meant that we don't have sort of a middle of inventory. We don't have a lot of starter homes and smaller homes. And that missing middle makes it difficult for people to get into the housing market, but it also makes it really difficult for people to move around within the housing market as well. So in other markets, you would see a lot more intra-market turnover where, you buy a starter home, then you buy a larger family home, then you downsize in retirement again. We don't have as many of those moves because our inventory is not as diverse. And then our market prices are just very sticky. They're extremely resistant to downward pressure because of all of the things that are bolstering up our demand that I'll kind of talk about here. So this is the crazy yarn chart of, trying to track the serial killer, right? Of what is the culprit, but everything is interconnected. So our lack of land here means that we have limited housing stock. And that limit of housing stock means that prices remain high, which hurts our housing availability and affordability. Those high prices, as we talked about, we have a very strong rental market. As Robin talked about the different types of markets, that lack of intra-market turnover I talked about, continual growth in demand, and our low holding costs as well. We have very low property taxes. That makes it easy to hang on to underutilized property. That means that all of our prices tend to be high and sticky. We also talked about the fact that we have marginal lands that are left, which tends to mean that we have more low density developments, which means we have higher end housing that gets developed out as an outcome, which again leads us right down the path of, again, we're back to that limited housing stock, as well as, having those low density developments, meaning no backbone infrastructure, which means lack of infill options, which means lack of land. Again, same thing, the high cost of building here as well means that we've generally gotten more high cost housing development, which gets us right down the path once again to our challenges with housing availability and affordability. So again, thinking about land development and market is a helpful way to kind of peel apart the issue, but it's important to remember that you have to put them all back together again to understand how interconnected all of these issues are in terms of the challenge that we face with housing affordability and availability.
Wanted to spend a minute talking about new affordable housing in the works. These are some of the projects that are out there. Sitka Community Land Trust is going to be building 4 new rental units. BHA is building a new 8-plex. The Sitka Homeless Coalition is doing the tiny homes, that's 12 units. And BHA is going to be extending Herb Diedrichson Street to create new affordable lots for tribal citizens with funding from the tribe. There is also new rental housing that Search is developing. That's an important addition to our housing supply. It's not subsidized. Also, the city has appropriated $750,000 for a study of municipally owned land to identify the best areas for housing development. So we do have some new subsidized housing in the pipeline, as well as some other development. Believe it or not, Sitka is actually building more housing than any other region of the state, with the exception of the Mat-Su. At the Housing Summit, attendees came up with dozens of ideas to increase our supply of affordable and available housing. We have a list of all of them if you're interested. At the end of the summit, people came together and said, what are we most excited about doing? That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only ideas or the best ideas, but those were the ideas that had the most energy. So some of the priorities were making more efficient use of our hard-to-develop land by building higher density housing. This will require some creative design and maybe some changes in land use regulation, but our current zoning code has a fair amount of flexibility. We talked about taking a closer look at city policies to provide stronger incentives for year-round housing. And the city could consider changes to both land use regulations and tax policy. Working cooperatively with owners of mobile home parks to prevent this land from being converted to other uses. Creating a new neighborhood of tiny homes with some communal space for homeowners to share, possibly for childcare. Alaska has a cold climate research center to develop better housing for our Arctic regions. At the Housing Summit, we talked about, how about a wet climate research center to create better housing for Southeast? Our only housing authority in Sitka is pretty much limited to serving Native households at this time. There's a fair amount of interest in looking at whether it could be expanded to serve more of the community. Some of our most creative housing projects were the result of a few committed advocates working on them, and we need more of these people. And finally, we came up with the idea of a new network to work on housing issues, not a new organization, but maybe something that looks a little bit like Sitka Health Summit, where people would come together, split up into groups, and start working on some of these ideas. So next steps. We're interested in hearing from the Assembly if you have any ideas or priorities. Tribal Council is also holding a work session with BHA in June. We're going to be convening the first meeting of the Sitka Housing Network to develop those working groups. And we're open to more ideas and ways that we can make progress on this.
Well, thank you for the report, and thank you both and the group for the time that was spent on it. In a way, it's a good thing that it's not just a Sitka issue, but it's a hard thing that it's not just a Sitka issue. I kind of wish it was, because then there would be some way we could solve this. However, when the nation is going through the exact same things, it makes it a little bit harder. So thank you for looking into the keys of Sitka, and maybe we can unlock one of these doors to help provide our citizens housing. So appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
Stephen, can I say something? I just said, really recommend that everybody pay attention to Minneapolis with the missing middle legislation for the state of Minnesota. It truly is avant-garde, and it can be applied to what we need to do here in Sitka. And that cliche is going to be beaten down, the missing middle, but the legislative action going on in Minnesota really addresses this. And I'm excited for what Minneapolis is going to do with their housing, hopefully.
Thank you. Moving along this evening in special reports. Anyone here for government to government? Municipal boards, commissions, committees? Municipal departments? School district? Students and guests? Seeing none, that'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly. My name is Lauren Wild, and I'm part of the Early Childhood Coalition here in Sitka. I wanted to give you a quick update on a few things that we have been going on. First, as many of you know, we had a Career Pathways Summit last fall in September 2023, where we brought together early childhood industry professionals, educators, businesses, and government. As a result of this summit, we are partnering with the University of Alaska Anchorage to offer early childhood education classes in the high schools in Sitka through their occupational endorsement program. The goal here is workforce development and career education. We're hoping high school students can enroll in these early childhood education classes to gain awareness of early childhood education as a profession, train them to be job ready when they graduate from high school, and maybe a few of them will go on to work in the industry here in Sitka, bolstering our trained workforce. Finally, these classes are helpful to so many students if all they do is help them become a little bit better prepared to be parents themselves. All 3 high schools in Sitka were really interested, plan to offer the classes in the fall. We're getting local professionals in town to teach the classes in person as adjuncts through UAA. Sitka High had 17 students list this class as their first choice elective and 9 as their second. So it's actually looking like a pretty popular class at the high school. And Pacific High had at least 6 students that wanted to take it. We're not quite sure about Edgecombe's numbers yet because they're kind of going through a transition in their schedule, but we'll know soon. We're really excited about this. So grateful to the high school professionals for being willing to offer the class and to UAA for being willing to cover the adjunct fees this year to pilot these classes and see if they'll work out. As a final note on this, UAS does not currently have an early childhood education program, but they are working on it, and UAA is committed to helping transition this program to UAS when they do get one up and running to kind of keep it a little bit more local. In other news, Sitka Counseling was awarded a grant last fall to open a therapeutic preschool, which they've officially opened as of, I think, last week or the week before. So big shout out to them. It's a referral-based preschool, including individual and family therapy, other therapies based on individual treatment plans. And so Chris Washko and Sitka Counseling is responsible for making all of that happen. So big kudos and congratulations to them. And then next on the list for us is working with the city to bring businesses and governments to the table to discuss the continued childcare crisis, declining availability of childcare and after-school age care in Sitka over the past 10 to 15 years, and what roles government, private business, and others may have in working towards a solution. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Richard Ween. I'd like to thank Lauren Wild for getting up here and speaking about the early childhood education. I think that all employers would benefit very much if they kicked into some form of fund when they have young workers who have young children who require childcare. I think every one of those organizations, would clearly benefit because we can't always depend on grant-funded things like this. And it's important, since this is Sitka, that we take care of our own. But speaking of that, I wish, and I will always say it when we have our quarterly reports, that the individuals who are responsible for those reports would get up and give a summary. And because sometimes in those reports, there's just so much information that needs to be put out there for the few people that do listen to this, but also it serves as a reminder to the Assembly of what some of the issues are. We have the Catleyan Street Pavement and Improvement Project. Within the report from P&GR, Public and Government Relations, it was stated that that was not funded. I clearly remember the conversations that they had here at this assembly We put in $2.5 million at the highest to get 5 points in an effort to secure this loan, showing how serious we were. And I also remember the conversation of what would we do if we didn't get it. Right now, the cost of this project, Kathleen Ann Street, is listed at $8.7 million. Since it's not off the ground now, I can only guess that by the time we get our mojo running, it'll be 10 plus. So the question is, how do we handle things like this? And I think it's an important discussion point and needs to be fully brought to the public. On a, I'll say, equally happy note, we have today the producer price index came out, and it was very hot. Hot, hot, hot. You can look up the numbers if you want, but the producer's price index is an important index because it's the amount of money that people pay for the end product. The bottom line is that with that kind of number, the Fed Reserve will not lower interest rates, but will be moved to increase them. Tomorrow, the consumer price index comes out, and all of these things affect Sitka. They affect housing, they affect everything, and these are what I call the externals. The externals are going to affect our future. You can talk whatever you want.
Good afternoon. My name is Austin Cranford. I would first like to thank Robin and Amy for their Housing Summit study. Some things that I wanted to bring up is that the backbone infrastructure definitely does need to be looked into. I'm currently trying to develop a property myself, and I'm going to have to cut a road and utilities into the property, which is going to increase the cost of developing that property on top of the housing cost. And then regarding the rates, if you're not able to get a subsidized interest rate, the current prime rate as of May 14th, 2024 was 8.5%. Since banks use the prime rate plus 3% formula, that comes out to about 11.5%, 12% for most loans. That makes a lot of the housing even more unaffordable for the people that live here. So we want to keep that in mind when we're building housing. The reason I came up here today was, however, not the housing study. It was brought to my attention by 4 people that the city is missing about $60,000. Apparently they were defrauded. Mail scheme, and somebody changed the account details and sent $60,000. I'd like to know how that happened, because where I work, it takes at least 6 people to change account details. So does the city only have one person that it only needs one signature to change account details? I heard the FBI is investigating. The city claims to be transparent, yet it wasn't on today's agenda. It hasn't been put in the news. I talked to the news, and they had a meeting with the city administrator, and it wasn't brought up. So we claim transparency, yet we're missing $60,000, and there's been no comment from the city about it. I would like to have a comment here within the next week, or I'll be requesting records from the city, as well as filing a FOIA request with the FBI if they're involved. Thank you.
Anyone else this evening for persons to be heard? Seeing none, that'll bring us to our consent agenda.
I move to approve consent agenda consisting of item A, resolution 24-11, authorizing a 50/50 matching grant application to the Office of the Justice Program's Bulletproof Vest Partnership.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Is there any public comment? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve the consent agenda, Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Yested,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
and Mr. Pike.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Item B, please.
I move to reappoint Trish White to a 3-year term on the Local Emergency Planning Committee under Category 5, Owners/Operators of Facilities, and Shauna Thornton to a 3-year term on Port and Harbors Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to reappoint two individuals to their respected board, commission, or committee. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. My name is Richard Ween. As always, I will come up to thank those people who serve. What is particularly gratifying is that Trish White, who is a super Jimbo here in Sitka, who has been here forever and has also been working on the LEPC for a long time. She's a valued member of the community, and I don't know whether she obviously has not reached that stage in life where she wants to sit down and put her feet up. But she certainly deserves it if she wants to do it. But thank you, Trish White, for, re-upping. The other individual is Shauna Thornton. Actually, she's been in Sitka for 7 years. That's, I don't know, they call it the 7-year itch or the 7-year stretch, 7th inning stretch. The important thing here is that Shauna, since she's come here, and I remember when she got here, she's always been very active and very involved. And this is her re-up on the Ports and Harbor. And again, I'd like to thank her for, again, doing civic duty, and people who do that are much appreciated. Thank you.
Anyone else on the reappointments? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes?
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
and Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 on item B.
Bringing us to unfinished business, item C, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2024-09A on third and final reading, authorizing a property tax exemption for Youth Advocates of Sitka Incorporated, YS, for the property located at 3411 Halibut Point Road.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 24-09A. Is there any public comment?
Good evening, this is Richard Ween. I guess this will probably be the last time we'll be speaking about 3411 Halibut Point Road. This is a property that's being asked for a voluntary exemption from taxes. Again, this is a reminder to the Assembly that they need to figure out who is actually probably the most eligible for these things, and they need to look at their financial statements to see how much inequities and so forth that they do have, because there are some individuals that are, pretty wealthy and don't need the extra $5,000 from the city, which I think that maybe the city can use, certainly in the future. It is taking off the tax rolls a $900,000 property. Now, I personally think that the property is undervalued, because I certainly look at the real estate listings and I see these small properties which are on Halibut Point on the water, and they're being sold for $500,000 a piece. And so that means, and these are knockdown homes, they're little cabins or sheds, but just the land there with the view is something. And this is kind of like a double lot because it's long. And so that means that the house is only worth $400,000. I've been in the house. It's a lovely house. It has a lovely view. It's quite an incredible property. To say it's worth $900,000 means that it is way under assessed. But once it goes into the hands outside the tax rolls, it'll be institutionalized. And therefore, the only thing that can happen is its value will go down. So my notion is You're going to do what you do. It's 5,000 off the tax rolls. It's a beautiful home off the tax rolls. And I understand all the reasons for this, but the Assembly needs to come to an understanding about what is going on and how they determine who gets these voluntary discretionary exemptions. And they need to also produce the entire list for the city to review. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve ordinance 2024-09A on third and final reading, Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
and Mayor Eisenbais.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 on item C.
New business item D, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2024-10 on first reading, making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year 2024 replace Harbor 3,000 horsepower outboard.
Second.
3,000 horsepower outboard.
No, 300,
I'd like
add
to
a
buy
zero
one of
there. Yeah.
Might be too big for his boat, but. John, I understand Stan has a introduction on his 3,000 horsepower outboard.
Yes. Stan, come on up, please.
Your name is Stan, correct? He's just so overwhelmed with his big outboard, he doesn't know what to do now.
The thing that I could do. Good evening, Stan Elias. and
Thank you,
Harvard
Stan.
So this outboard we've had since let's back up here. The boat was built in 1986 and it's gone through several outboards due to we use it quite often for maintenance of the harbor systems, towing logs, and a number of other things. This particular outboard I had budgeted for the upcoming fiscal year. However, we were hoping to limp it along till July 1st, but we just couldn't do it. So it's time to replace it.
Perfect, thank you. If we have any questions, we'll call you back up. Is there any public comment on ordinance 24-10? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve ordinance 2024-10 on first reading, Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbais,
Yes.
Mr. Pike.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0 on item D, that's first reading.
Item E, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2024-11 on first reading and adopting budgets and capital improvement plan for the general fund, internal service funds, and special revenue funds for the fiscal year July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 24-11. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. My name is Richard Ween. In 180 seconds, I can't even begin to address the budget. As I'm sure you are all aware, you've had multiple meetings on it. But at the end of the day, when you can't say no, it's impossible to negotiate. And of note, and I know it was brought out in an article in the Sentinel and so forth, this represents, I think, a 14.4% increase in the budget. And this is interesting because what you see when you begin to look at it is that, for example, if you go to, it's in the packet, you can go online to get it. If you look at, they have one that are salaries that are listed. which is very interesting. And those are on pages 8 through 12. And of note is that there are 181 FTEs. And I don't know, when I was on the assembly, why do I remember 115 or 120? I don't know. I would certainly like to see a graph of FTEs within the city, because when you have that type of increase in manpower, woman power, those are fixed costs, which actually not really fixed. They increase because of, union wage aspects and so forth. So the bottom line is that we are creating here something. We always talk about the word sustainable. This is not sustainable unless we do the black tar heroin thing, which you see in another part of the budget, which talks about our reliance on tourism. As being something that is the growth industry here, but it is also the same thing that's putting pressure on housing and everything else that we find inflationary. And so you just can't even begin to talk about it, but it's creating a situation which will not be able to survive in the future. And you have to look at the externals. You have to look at the world around us and see whether we, with our little budget, is going to survive what happens within the greater economy. The CEO of Goldman Sachs was absolutely livid today, talking about the expense that we're paying on the U.S. debt now, and how it's becoming unsustainable. And again, the PPI was out of this world today, and all of these things are going to affect the budget.
Anyone else on 24-11?
Hi, good evening. Rachel Roy with Visit Sitka. I just wanted to point out, and I believe I'm on the right item, the revenue fund, the visitor enhancement. When in reviewing it this evening, it looks like it is missing the Visit Sitka contract, even base contract amount. And so I just want you to be aware of that. I know that the item was on the agenda last meeting, but it wasn't discussed. Generally, the administrator's budget includes a allocation that comes as a result of our work session, and it does not cover that operating expense that we're contracted for. What I will say is that I've met with the administrator and your finance director to kind of talk about how it would look to use CPV funds. And so I'll be following up with their recommendation, and I have a follow-up meeting with JJ. But I think what it's going to look like is that there'll have to be a special appropriation that comes in the next few weeks into maybe your next packet for your next assembly meeting. But I just wanted to call that out because you're moving forward without that contracted amount in this budget.
Good evening. My name is Austin Cranford. Just a quick piggyback off of some of the stuff that was mentioned by Dr. Wayne. I'd like the public to know, if they've not seen it, that this budget is about actually, it is exactly 133 pages long as I look at it. And on page 13, the deficit is about 18 million, if I'm reading that correctly, that we're in the hole. So my question to the city is where is that money coming from? Loans, grants? Talking about loans, previously mentioned when I was up here just about 15 minutes ago, is that the average rate's about 11.5%, 12% that the taxpayers are going to end up having to pay. And if that rate continues to go up, depending on the type of loan, the interest rates will continue to go up. And eventually, how is the city going to pay for it? If the assembly can answer those questions for the public, that would be great. Thank you.
Anyone else on 24-11? Assembly deliberation? I just want to start out by saying that this was an extremely well-run budget process. While we did have to meet extensively, I think April was every Tuesday and Thursday that we could possibly meet. We had to meet on this. The process that we now go through is very clear to this assembly, which I do appreciate. And I think that sentiment was shared, and that is a reflection on our finance director and then the crew who puts this together. I think the adjustments that the assembly had to make were very clear. I don't think there was too much bickering about it is the correct word in this, because we used to go through that process where it was quite a bit more painful. So I also want to thank John for putting forward resource proposals that are a very clear way for us to increase or decrease the budget, because this assembly does have the ability to increase, as we saw in road maintenance and striping. We increased that budget. So hopefully that's $100,000 more potholes that we're going to get filled this year. I think our citizens would appreciate that. I also want to thank those who showed up to the budget meetings. It often surprises me how underattended these budget meetings are, because these are the most important meetings of the year. Without them, we have no marching orders for the year. So a lot of our decisions that are going to come forward now are based off of the budget we pass. So if there's any meeting for anybody to show up to, it's definitely that budget meeting. And I would encourage citizens in the next budget cycle to come to those budget meetings and make your voice heard at that time. We had organizations come forward in the past, and that's why we have a Parks and Rec program. That's why we have a sustainability coordinator, because we heard from the public. So that is definitely the time to make some broad and vast changes in the face of the municipality. So again, thank you, staff, for working with the assembly on this budget process. I think it was about as painless as it could be. And there's some positive news for Sitka in the future, I believe. I think it's exciting that we have a little bit more free spending money. It's still intimidating to me to spend more instead of cut budgets. I'm still not quite sure how to do that, but it was a good exercise. So thank you to the assembly and staff for that one. John?
I'd just like to add very quickly, yes, there's an increase in the city budget, as we've seen, 14.6%, and there has been a influx of revenue, largely tied to tourism. But a city budget works as like it is a working capital fund. As the money comes in, the citizens expect those dollars to be spent back onto services provided to the citizens. We heard a lot this year about things like the pool, taking over some of the burdens from the school, getting ahead on some of our deferred maintenance, or chipping away at some of our deferred maintenance. And as the mayor mentioned, potholes and striping and things we haven't been able to do for quite some time. So I believe we presented something that is starting to hit some of those desires of the community, and presenting a balanced budget that works within the constraints of a working capital fund, trying to get the money back out to the citizens in forms of services. And with the increase in services, it requires resources to do that, hence the resource proposal form. So I appreciate the Assembly's time throughout the past few months going through the multiple meetings, and I'm happy where we landed. Thank you.
Anything else from the assembly? Chris? Called your name.
You two
have
both
to
hit
now.
it, so I can't really say much more.
JJ?
Because it was such a smooth process and such a well laid out program, I didn't come to a question with this packet until page 127 of 133. And it's just a kind of a quick, but really in preparation for our special meeting on Thursday. Comment on the commercial vessel passenger tax. John, do you know if interest accrued from that fund has to be spent in the same constraints as that tax, or is it more available for use? Mhm.
I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that question. Melissa, do you
Is
know
that-
the answer to that?
I don't actually know the question to that. I do know that any interest generated on those funds is kept in that fund and treated exactly the same as the rest, whether or not we absolutely have to. We err on the side of doing so.
Thank you, because that is very specific money, and it looks like from this page here that we have $14,857 of interest from fiscal year 23 that may or may not have to be spent in the same kind of really tight parameters of that tax money that was given by the state. So I'll be thinking about that and potentially asking our municipal attorney and seeing if that falls under the same parameters. Thank you.
Anything else? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve ordinance 2024-11 on first reading, Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
and Mr. Yestad.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 on item E.
Item F, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2024-12 on first reading and adopting the budget and capital improvements plan for enterprise funds for the fiscal year July 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025, amending rates in the Title 15 Public Utilities of the Sitka General Code and adopting mortgage rates and other harbor fees.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 24-12. Is there any public comment?
Good evening, this is Richard Ween. I'd like to advise the electorate. This is a very simple document to go through, and I think everybody should certainly breeze through the agenda packets. But this deserves repeating so everybody understands, and that the water rate will increase 4%. The wastewater will increase 8.25%. Solid waste will go up 4%. Moorage will be 4%. As you note, the electric rate did not go up except in the fact that customer monthly charges will increase. So the thing is, this is easy. It's 11 pages. It's just a breeze through. You can get, I think, most of the facts with a eyeball and you'll understand what's going on here. But again, this is, there are things we can do things about and things we can't. But this again is part of, we have our national inflation, but this represents a certain internal inflation. And if you wonder why people are having difficulty afford things, you can see how all these forces are coming together to create something very interesting. I don't mean to say flush less or drink less or do any of those things. We need all of these services. But the important thing is that we can help control some of these costs by not promoting so much development here, in that there is really no reason to expand hydro services or anything like that. We're having difficulty maintaining them as they stand. And when the government stops printing money, as it will have to soon, we may find ourselves a little on the short. So to me, on budgetary items, I like to have money in the bank so I can save for a rainy day, which is most every day here in Sitka. And so I always believe in prudence and moderation in all budgetary things. Thank you.
Anyone else on 24-12? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve ordinance 2024-12 on first reading, Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbais,
Yes.
and Ms. Carlson.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 on first reading for item F.
Thank you. As it is the top of the hour, we will take a recess. Assembly, please be seated when you're ready. Well, thank you. The assembly is seated, so we will continue on with our agenda tonight. Item G, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2024-13 on first reading, making supplemental appropriations for fiscal year 2024 Clean Energy to Communities Project.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. John, I understand that you have an introduction on this one.
I do. Thank you, Mayor. Clean Energy to Communities, or C2C project, is a 3-year partnership with the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, offering in-depth technical expertise to develop and secure reliable, resilient, equitable, and affordable clean energy systems by helping Sitka remain 100% renewable electricity in increasingly unpredictable economic, social, and environmental climates. CBS is considered a subcontractor for NREL under this grant program and will be given $500,000 in subcontract funds over the course of the project. The supplemental appropriation in the amount of $500,000 is needed to receive and expend those funds throughout the course of the project.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on 24-13?
Good evening, Richard Ween. This is very interesting. And I remember when the folks were making presentations for this to the assembly. And one of the things I noted was that one of the presenters was actually not very knowledgeable about parts of the subject she was speaking about. And so when I see this, I see a lot of, if people look at the memo, just lots of buzzwords, happy buzzwords for green energy and so forth. And when you think about it, the only green energy that's important here is maintaining the health of our hydro. Photovoltaic cells, I think, are kind of a no-go, where they're landfill, ridiculous things that are purchased from China, who's the largest producer, and we take virtually all of our solar cells from them. And also windmills are positively unecological in our environment here. And if you just know what goes into build these industrial megawatt windmills, turbines, it's insane. So here they're getting $3.5 million. And one of the things that's kind of odd is that it's to develop a climate projection model, precipitation modeling to inform operations. Sounds like a task for NOAA. Identifying efficiency members for existing infrastructure. Do you think our electrical department should be doing that now? Update operational standards for best management. Do you think our electrical department should be doing that now? Grid analysis and critical failure point identification. Do you think our electrical department should be doing that now? Workforce assessment, career pathway development, and training opportunities. I think that sounds great. Workforce assessment, career pathways development. We can't hire enough people to staff electric now. And if I were to have that $3.5 million, I would take it and put it in a fund, and for linemen and so forth, offer incentive to come here. Give them a $50,000 bonus or whatever to bring them here. I do not, you're going to do what you want. You're going to vote for it. Everybody's going to be happy. Kumbaya. I have my guitar in my car after the meeting. But the bottom line is everything that they list here is something that the electric department should be doing. This should be a reminder of what the job is. And I could spend that money a hell of a lot better. Support the hydro, period. Reduce development and stress on the facility. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on 24-13? Assembly deliberation? I think I'll leave that one alone as well. Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve ordinance 2024-13 on first reading, Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
and Mr. Celine.
No.
Motion passes 4-1 on first reading. Item G.
Item H, please.
I move to approve a 20-year historic preservation covenant between the State of Alaska Historic Preservation Office and the City and Borough of Sitka for the Japonski Island Boathouse.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. John, I understand Amy is here to introduce this item.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Assembly members. Amy Ainsley, Planning and Community Development Director. So this item is regarding a historic preservation covenant, which is essentially a agreement that we as the property owner would sign, and it runs with the land for a set period of time that requires, a particular action or inaction on the part of the property owner, just generally speaking. So in the specifics of this case, the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society has been leasing this property since 2005. They have a 20-year lease for the property and 3 10-year extensions that are also available during that time. So the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society has been working very hard over the last 20, almost, we are coming up on that 20th year mark now, to bring volunteer work groups in, as well as to bring in a lot of grant funding to restore and to rehabilitate that property. So most recently, they applied for a grant through the National Park Service, the Maritime Heritage Preservation Fund. And in the past, the smaller grants for historic preservation would require a 5 to 10-year historic preservation covenant. The National Park Service is redesigning that program, and now they want to see 20-year historic preservation covenants on the properties that they give grants to. On the upside, however, that covers the covenant requirement for all subsequent grants that could be applied for and obtained in that period. And so we shouldn't see another covenant like this for a period of 20 years if this one is approved. So the basics of the covenant are essentially that, that we will maintain and repair the Japonski Island Boathouse to preserve its architectural, historical, or archaeological features, and that the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, would be consulted before any work like demolition, construction, alteration, ground disturbing materials were to take place, and that anything that were to be recovered would be handled and reposited appropriately. So as the property owner, again, we have to sign the covenant, but we rely very heavily on the lessee, who is, they are really the specialists and the experts in this case regarding the historic preservation of this property to, really, uphold the terms of the covenant. And they have successfully been able to do that with both the covenants we've had on this property in the past, as well as these are very similar grant requirements that they've been complying with for other grants that we've received. And have been able to uphold those as well. I'll be available for questions if there are any after public comment.
Thank you for the introduction. Is there any public comment on item 24-071?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly. And also I'd like to say thank you to the city staff, especially Mr. Leach, Holly Bain, and Amy Ainsley that we've been working with since last October on getting these covenants signed by the city. I was really pleased to see that in the
Identify
memo.
yourself for the record, please.
I'm sorry?
If you could identify
Oh, I'm
yourself for
so
the
sorry.
record.
My name is Keith Nitre, Executive Director of the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
My apologies. I was really pleased to see that in the memo that you got in your packet, that it was recommended that this motion be approved. This is something that's really important to us. We've been working on that boathouse, which is part of the National Historic Landmark, for the past 19 years. Our current lease with the city expires in February of next year, and our lease allows for 3 10-year extensions beyond that upon mutual agreement with the city. And we sure as heck hope to be here for at least those 30 years, if not longer, on that. In the memo that you got, it said we did apply for a grant that we did get from the State Historic Preservation Office for a $40,000 matching grant to install phase 1 of a required and much needed sprinkler system inside the boathouse so we could open it up to the public. As of today, I talked with Kathleen Tarr of the State Historic Preservation Office, and we did get a second grant, a matching grant for $90,000 also to install the second phase of the sprinkler system and continue rehabilitating and restoring the rest of the boathouse. So this year alone, those two grants are worth $130,000 that we would not be available to get reimbursed from the state or the National Park Service without this covenant. We're literally hamstrung without this covenant to continue our project. Over the years, we brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars into this community through our grants, and almost all of that money has been spent here locally with local businesses and our local contractors, and we can continue to see that in the future. I'm not sure what else to say, but if there are any questions, I'm more than willing to answer that. About fiscal responsibility, our budget this year is around $160,000. So we're financially stable, and we look forward to being so in the future. And once we open our Maritime Heritage Center and are able to generate sustainable funding through heritage tourism, which is a growing component of our tourism visitor industry in Sitka, I think this will be a valued component of our education and historic efforts here in Sitka. And this is Mike Littman next to me.
Thanks, Keith.
And he's the president of the board of directors.
If we do have questions, we can call you back up,
Sure.
but during public comment, it's not appropriate. So thank you both for being available if we have questions. If you could hit the button on the very bottom of the microphone. There we go.
Where
Thank
the
you.
red lights are. Thank you. Bruce Gazaway. I'm also a board member of the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society, and thank you for giving us a chance to talk with you tonight. The Sitka Maritime Heritage Society, like the Friends of the Library, like the Friends of the Animal Shelter, are just one of many organizations in Sitka where the public partners with the city in order to improve city services. We feel we've been effective for nearly 20 years in doing that with the city. We look forward to continuing this partnership. And we're not only just trying to save a historic building, preserve a historic building, although that's important. We have a larger vision, and part of that vision is to restore this boathouse, which was once a key element of our local maritime economy, to restore a boathouse to operation. We feel that this is the best way to preserve maritime skills, and that is really our mission, to preserve the maritime heritage, which is part of what made Sitka such a unique and interesting community for all the many years. So our goal, and we've been happy to work in partnership with the city to restore a historic structure, and our goal to preserve maritime heritage is focused on recreating a functional boathouse, and by passing these skills from one generation to the next to preserve our maritime heritage. We thank you for the time that we've had to work with the city. We still have a long ways to go, but we're pretty optimistic that we'll get there. And we thank you all. And again, thanks to your city staff who've been such great help to us in providing advice and keeping us on track. Thank you all.
Good evening, Richard Ween. Well, I can only say if there ever were a item on the agenda where you didn't need deliberation, this is it. This is kind of a no-brainer. They've been at this for a long time. And though Keith said that he hopes they're here for the next 30 years, I know I won't be. So I wish they'd hurry up and get it done so I could be present at the ribbon cutting which, every time I drive by there, I always look for its progress. And I'm very happy they're making way. This is clearly something they need to have done in order for granting possibilities. And just as a side note, there is a future historic building in the making, and it's called Sea Daddies. So that will be, hopefully you will support this, and I know you will.
Anyone else on 24-071? Back to the assembly for deliberation. Chris?
I do have a question. I don't know if this is best for John or Amy. Just kind of how the lease will work out in the future here. This is a 20-year covenant and we're coming up on 10-year extensions. How does that work? Does it automatically go into a 20-year again, or we have to re-up throughout this covenant?
I'm happy to answer, and Amy, if you want to make your way up there if I get it wrong, but essentially, we are the property owners and the covenant would apply to us as the property owner. It does not apply any obligation to continue forward with any of the lease extensions. So the covenant would carry over to the city and borough if it were not the group.
Okay.
With the lease extension. Get it?
Mr. Yestad had asked a question of John, which he found to be answered. So thank you. I think that was going to be my only thing as well is, I celebrate the work of this group and I appreciate everything they've been doing. I think they could agree that the first couple years were probably painfully slow for them. But now to see the progress that's actually happening out there, we see a lot of good work going into it. And this is work that the municipality would not be able to do on its own. So thank you to the volunteers as much as they thanked city staff. But I would agree that if we go forward on this process, to me, I'm essentially agreeing to 2 10-year extensions at this point. The municipality doesn't have any ability to continue with this. So I think the Maritime Group is the right place for that. But to me, we are essentially leasing this property out for the next 2 extensions, perhaps more. It's not set in stone, as Mr. Yestad just heard, but it is a likely scenario as we go forward. Anything else from the assembly? Tim?
Yeah, I guess I viewed this covenant as sort of a clarification of ownership and responsibilities as to who owns that property and who maintains it. I mean, what the assembly and the city chooses to do with that property is different than this covenant in my mind. So they can't go forward without the covenant, but the covenant is explaining the relationship between the state, historical, and the city is what I took away from this conversation. And this lease thing is fine and dandy, but not part of the covenant necessarily, so.
Anything else from the assembly? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve the 20-year historic preservation covenant, Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
and Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 on item H.
Thank you. That would bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Good evening. My name is Richard Ween. This is the final persons to be heard. I am not the final person to be heard, but this is the final session for persons to be heard. The budget was spoken about tonight. There is just some other issues related to the fact that tax sales revenue is 50% of the general fund's income. And one of the interesting things is that I really haven't found a particular document that has parsed out exactly where all this tax revenue comes from and from what sources. I saw some preliminary data modeling from cruise passengers, but there were some very legitimate questions as to how they made the model to determine how much money actually came from cruise. But within the letter for the budget, there's a statement here which says that there is significant risk that the current funding levels for highly desired services like our parks and recreation program, local education, and investment in infrastructure will not be maintained should initiatives limiting tourism impact our sales tax revenue. In addition, the threat of litigation related to limiting tourism could have a devastating cost both monetarily and in terms of the time taken from other important initiatives. I think that's pretty rhetorical. I won't use some adjectives there, to describe that. But the bottom line is it's conflating community interest in trying to limit the tourism with the destruction and existential threat to Sitka's very existence. And I really find that, not very healthy per se, because we don't even have the exact number of what's going on here as far as tax revenues go. But the important thing here to remember is that there are outside forces, because revenue is also somebody's personal income, and the personal stress that citizens today are under is so great, whether it has to be credit card, mortgage, food, et cetera. And by the way, since the Biden administration got in, it's 19.4%. And that's just, general inflation. And that doesn't include it all. So the bottom line here is it's not just tourism, because when the tourists run out of cash, what's going to happen? Who are you going to blame? Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? I don't know. But the bottom line is it's a complex situation, and you can't conflate a potential initiative.
Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening? Seeing none, we'll go on to reports. Since our last meeting, it's amazing how 3 weeks seems like such a long time in between meetings now that we're not meeting every Tuesday and Thursday. What are we going to do Thursdays? I'm going to miss you guys. Maybe we should just, oh yeah, we'll meet again Thursday. Great. After that, we should just come out here and hang out just because. But I was able to do my quarterly report with Tribal Chairman Woody Widmark. And that's just kind of an informal hour where he has some staff support. I have John, and we're just able to kind of chat. And like I said, it's very informal. It's over a cup of coffee, and we can talk about things that are coming up, strides that we're making, or anything like that. So it was a good meeting. Lasted just about an hour, and look forward to our next one. And I just wanted to bring something to Assembly's attention. They may have seen it in their email, but Senate Finance had introduced a new senior property tax exemption level that had gone up to $450,000 for individuals. That was recently ratcheted back down to $250,000. AML, who sent the email, was not sure if it had the votes to pass Senate, but Senate Finance right now is proposing a $250,000 property tax exemption for those who are eligible. This would be an unfunded mandate as the current one is, so something to watch out for on the Assembly level. John?
You took the thing I was going to talk about, so I have no report.
Well, if you would have told me you were going to talk about it, I wouldn't have talked about it. Then you could have talked. Liaison representatives?
Still trying to get that copier going at the library.
The Tourism Task Force had their last meeting, and we have that joint work session on Thursday. So we will be meeting with them in this room to kind of parse through the recommendations. I believe that there was 31 total recommendations, if that sounds about right, in those 5 directive areas. So we have that to look forward to later this week.
Thank you. And Chris, you had one?
Yeah, so let's see, Port and Harbors, we met for the last time before summer break. We kind of only had one thing on the agenda, and it's something that Tim and I will be bringing forward here, hopefully in a little bit. Just some harbor parking lot rule potential changes, so. And then today I sat in on a Parks and Rec meeting. There was a few interesting things in there, but one thing I thought that was interesting is with the repave plan of Lake Street, there is potentially looking at adding some parking space, dedicated parking spaces for Swan Lake. They looked at a couple different designs and alternatives for that. And currently there's no funding for it. But there was a design that was chosen if funding is found. And then there was lots of discussion with permitting for Baranoff Warm Springs. So that seems to be something that's been on my radar a lot here the past couple weeks. So yeah.
Tim?
Yes, police and fire met as well, and they're very interested in this. And they were basically a parking ticket dispensation, and they were all harbor parking issues. So they're very interested in what the Ports and Harbors has come up with for how to deal with that, because otherwise that's their next meeting too, so.
Thank you. Sarah?
Alrighty, I'm just going over a list of our vacancies on boards and commissions. We have the Sustainability Commission, the Police and Fire Commission, Local Emergency Planning Committee, the Investment Committee, Historic Preservation Commission, Health Needs and Human Services Commission, and the Animal Hearing Board. So if folks are interested in any of those, they can contact our office and we'll get them set up with an application. Upcoming meetings, as the mayor stated, there's a special meeting on Thursday at 6 p.m. and we will be meeting in the auditorium. A regular meeting is May 28th.
Great, thank you. Any other reports this evening? Seeing none, that would bring us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Assembly. We are adjourned.